Take a deep breath, exhale, and join us for this episode of Hope Out of the Darkness.
Shelley Pavlis is a non-professional learning to navigate the world of suicide prevention. As a volunteer of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Orange County, California, she chats with people who, like her, are affected by suicide. Hear their real-life stories, learn how they keep living life to the fullest, and find out what can be done to stop suicide. Join the conversation with fellow AFSP volunteers and mental health professionals, all of whom have their own stories about suicide. Let's find hope out of the darkness.
Thanks for joining us today. Today, we are going to chat about mental health, hope and healing, and the arts. So to help with that discussion today, I have two really special guests joining me, Dylan Russell and Jake Blair. And I'll actually properly introduce them both in a sec. But first of all, I just wanted to say hi and thanks for being here. So, hello, Dylan.
Hi, Shell. Thanks for having us.
Hey, Jake.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So Dylan Russell, she's the Director of Education and Outreach at Laguna Playhouse here in Laguna Beach, California. She is a specialist in new play development and devised theater, and she has produced a ton of plays throughout her career at well-known theaters and conservatories. She's recognized as one of the top high school theater programs in America by Stage Directions magazine, and she's taught at a lot of prestigious theaters in the country. I will, of course, as always, drop her bio and all of her contact info in the show notes. But Dylan, I wanted to know, what do you want people to know about you?
I think one of the things that I want people to know about me is how much I feel like the arts can be used as a means of healing. It certainly has been in my own life. And that's a lot of the reason that drives why I do what I do. And I just think it offers such wonderful opportunity for people to express themselves and express what's going on in their life and be able to release it. And also have others witness it, which is a really important part of healing for me.
Wonderful. I absolutely love that. And we will talk a lot about that in a bit. Thank you so much. And then Jake Blair is a graduate student at the University of Denver, and he is studying to get his master's in social work. And then prior to that, in the San Francisco area, he was a counselor at an acute residential treatment center where he helped those with mental health conditions and substance abuse issues who were just getting out of crisis situations. So he's worked with a lot of people who have experienced suicidal ideations and, or who have attempted suicide. So he has a lot of experience in the area that we're going to chat about as well. And Jake is also Dylan's nephew, which we'll get into in a moment, as far as the family connection. But Jake, I wanted to know, too, what has your experience as a counselor helped to shape your kind of career path and your choice of graduate studies at all?
Absolutely. I was working in San Francisco at the acute residential treatment center for about 3 years before I decided to go back to school. And I would say that in those 3 years, I got a lot of personal experience working with people. But I decided after a while that I kind of wanted to have some more formal education about what I was learning, different methods or techniques of how to approach people in different situations. So it absolutely shaped my decision to go back to school.
Well, fantastic. I'm really glad that you're going to be part of our discussion today as well in talking about healing and the arts. So that brings me to the reason also you're together here as a family. You have shared experience as loss survivors. I'm very sorry for your loss, for both of you. And I wanted you both to share your story.
I'll start. One of the things that I've shared with you, Shell, is that I actually I have had two family members who have died by suicide. One of them was my uncle, and then the other one is one of my other nephews, Matthew. And this is something that Jake and I share, and part of the reason why I asked to bring him today. And he has also a special outlook on the arts and healing. So, yeah, that's our shared connection.
Okay. So Jake, yeah, share your experience and your connection. Maybe tell us a little bit about Matthew and your connection with him, and then your process of healing to this point. You know, we obviously, grieving is a constantly evolving thing, and it never really goes away. But yeah, please share today what has helped and a little bit about him.
Yeah. So I actually grew up really close with Matthew. We were spending, a lot of our childhood summers together. Our families were just very close. He was the same age as me, and it was honestly like one of the best friendships that I've ever had with someone. So after he died by suicide, it was obviously very hard. And, during that time, I was experiencing a lot of frustration and anger, I think, were the two main emotions I was experiencing. And, I didn't allow myself to really feel a lot of things at first. And it was a lot of, waiting until I was alone to process some of the feelings and to let myself feel those things.
We want to take a quick break and recognize that today's podcast episode may not be appropriate for everyone. If you are in crisis or know someone who is, please call the Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the word HELP to 741-741. And of course, if you feel you or someone you're with are in danger or experiencing a medical emergency, call 911.
But during that time, when I was in high school, because I was a senior in high school, I was in band, in orchestra, and I had been since the first grade. So, music was a huge part of my life. It took up most of my extracurricular activities. And the healing process definitely started with my teacher, my band teacher. And I was so fortunate to have someone like him in my life at the time. And, I was excused from a lot of classes, so I would go and hang out with him in his office a lot of the time and just talk about things. And I think what he saw that I needed was just a space to process. And that space came from him just listening to me and listening to my ideas surrounding death and suicide and suicidality and, my own personal experiences with it, and Matthew dying by suicide. And so kind of what he did to help me out is we had a lot of conversations about, what our ideas were after you die, a lot of conversations of what life means and how to live life to the fullest. But the most helpful part of everything was the music. And during that time, he started giving me a lot of scores for different symphonies, different songs that we were playing. And he just told me, when you go home and you have kind of no words to describe how you're feeling, you don't want to talk to anyone, just sit down and listen to these songs and read the music and follow the music and make notes of what stands out to you and what you connect with. And so through that process, I think the reason that it helped so much is that I was kind of forced to feel things. I think so much of myself had cut out the feeling in general because it was so much heartbreak at the time. But with music, when you do listen to it, it brings something up in you. It brings, I mean, when you're playing, you have to play with emotion. You have to play, with your breath, with your life. And so sitting there and listening and kind of reading this conversation that's happening between, all the instruments in the orchestra, and seeing how they're all interacting with each other while also going through the flow of emotions that each song had, I was kind of forced to feel again. And so that opened me up. And, with the conversations I was having with my band teacher, I think it obviously, didn't heal everything all of a sudden, but it got me started on kind of my journey to identify my emotions and to find some sort of way to express them. Because it was really hard at that time to try to find an avenue that worked for me.
Well, thanks so much for your candor. I know it's not always easy to share the story. That's sort of the thing about the arts, music, any form of art, is we have to experience it with emotion, right? So It makes perfect sense that helped you work through your emotions, because you can't help but experience from either end, whether you're performing or creating yourself, or whether you are, the recipient of that beauty and that art, as Dylan had mentioned earlier. So Dylan, how have you used the arts to kind of help yourself personally heal?
I feel like the way that I've used it to help myself personally heal, and as I was listening to Jake talk about his experience of that time after Matt's death, I had an experience that I'd like to share. I came back to work, and at that point in time, I was running a drama program at a high school, and I think it was the day after I'd returned. A couple of my drama students came up to me, and they were really concerned about this other young woman who'd worked on a couple of shows but wasn't quite as close to me, and she was quite depressed. And so they had checked in with me because I was one of the few teachers who was still around at the end of the day, and they were really very, very concerned about her. So I was kind of balancing rehearsal, but I checked in with them and I said, "How's it going?" And would just kind of walk through the space on my breaks and check on the three of them. And then there was a point towards the end of my rehearsal where they came up to me and they said, "We have to tell you something, but you can't tell anybody." And I said, "Well, I can't promise not to tell anybody. You know that. I will do my best for you." But what they confided is that this young woman had taken a bottle of aspirin, and that they had called the paramedics, and they had looked for the security guard to make sure that he could get in. And so I stayed with them, made sure that they could get in. But I think one of the things that was so profound to me about those experiences being back to back was that as an adult or a teacher or somebody who's in the position of your band teacher, there's this space of great caring and desire to help, and finding ways to do that can be received. Because I think one of the things that is most difficult when you're experiencing deep depression, when you're experiencing feelings that may put you in a negative mindset, is creating space for that individual to experience those feelings and not have any expectation around what that looks like. Being able to be quiet and just have somebody sit there with you, or being able to just rail and scream and let it out, being able to cry. But it's hard because frequently we all want to, particularly for people we care about, we all want to fix it. We want to fix the thing. We want to make it better. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I've come to is really facilitating a space through the arts where we can just allow the emotion and the story to exist, remain present with that person, do things that allow that person to know you're there, but don't crowd the space, really giving their voice the foreground and their story and their experience all of the space it needs to exist.
And it makes that space safe by doing that.
Yeah.
So, Jake, I just wanted to hop back. So, you obviously that was a bit of time ago. You've experienced some life since then. How now do you process your emotions? Has that changed at all since you did back then, or?
Yeah, it has changed. So, after I graduated high school, instead of pursuing music, I ended up getting my bachelor's of arts in psychology. And so, that kind of started me on my journey of exploring more of like mental health conditions and what it means to have those, and, how to work with people with that. I didn't really have such a great understanding of it until I worked that job in San Francisco, though. And, with that, there were so many clients that I had. I mean, every time someone came in, it was me doing a psychosocial assessment, and there was some sort of suicidality in it. If not, having them, come to us because that was their presenting problem. So there was a part of me that just grew to have an emotional tolerance to hear other people's stories, and an emotional tolerance to really sit there. And I think Dylan, described it perfectly when she says you have to allow that space for them to talk about it. You can't sit there and try to think about the perfect answer, or, think about something that's going to make them feel better in the moment. It's, not about that. It's about them and what they're experiencing. And so with hearing people's stories, I think what I really drew on from Matt's death and from other deaths in our family is more so what kind of space and what kind of energy you can provide other people with. And for me, it was taking note of the lessons I learned while he was still alive, the type of unconditional love he showed me, the type of friendship he showed me, just being able to be present with me and really seeing me as who I was. And it's incredible when you come into a space with someone and you can do that, and you're joining with someone who might be dealing with suicidality. You're not trying to talk them through it, you're joining with them, and you're sitting through those negative emotions. And so I think for me, it made it a lot easier when I kind of framed it in that way. Especially helped me process it so much better, because I knew that I was going in and trying to just have these conversations with these people, just trying to create the space with these people. And when difficult things would come up, I had my, coworkers. I had the people that were closest to me to talk about these things with. And once again, it was everyone opening up that space for each other. And if you have an idea about suicidality or death in general, you could have those conversations. And I think the connection that you make with other people is one of the most healing things that you can do. So that's kind of how I learned to process it over the years. And I definitely look to people who are the closest to me when times are difficult, when difficult situations come up, to kind of turn to them, say, hey, I just want to talk about this. And just creating that narrative and having someone else, like Dylan said, witness it and just like see it for what it is absolutely healing.
Dylan, you have worked really hard to create a space at Laguna Playhouse. Could you tell us a little bit about that space?
Absolutely. In the past year and a half, we have created a new outreach program called Our Stories. And the idea behind this program is to have workshops both at the Playhouse and with community organizations, where we go in and we do a workshop with any and everybody who wants to come to the table. We're focused on 16 to 25-year-olds right now. because they're one of the groups that is hardest hit in terms of feeling stigma towards mental health and needing that. And so what we do in the workshops is we create space for people to share their stories through improvisation, through storytelling, through generative theater practices, and engaging, listening and hearing each other's stories. And they can be any story. They don't have to be the most traumatic time you've ever experienced. We also have counselors who support us through that. Sometimes they're the counselors with the community organization. Sometimes they're people we bring in. But the whole idea of it is to create a safe space where people can share their stories and turn them into something. So they might turn it into a monologue or a video. Some people have utilized art and poetry as part of the exercises, and create a space to express oneself, one's story, one's experience, and then create a safe environment for that to be shared. So sometimes our final sharing is just with the immediate community organization. And sometimes our final sharing is getting the storyteller's permission to put their video up on our website to share with others. But the whole idea is that by sharing our stories, we're speaking to one another's stories. So I tell my story, Jake hears my story. We can begin to relate to each other in a new and different way. And then he may go to dinner with friends and say, "Oh, I heard this really cool thing today, blah, 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 blah." And one by one, our awareness, our empathy is opened, our awareness to others, our acceptance of others. And in the process, the storyteller has that sort of epiphany of being able to free their story from just being inside themselves and feel recognized by someone else hearing it and uplifted by the fact that, people will respond in such incredible ways. And it creates a huge amount of vulnerability. We just actually did. We're almost finished with our first in-person workshop with a community group in Santa Ana, and one of the exercises we do involves people talking about masks and what do they represent, and then drawing masks and saying, "Okay, design a mask that looks like what you'd like people to see in you." And it can be fanciful, it can be abstract, it can be anything you want it to be. And through the process of this, then we have people share their masks and talk about what inspired them, why they put certain things on the mask. And then we ask if they would allow the group to observe, like, what do they see in that person's mask? So we had this one student, and he had shared his mask, and he said, "Yeah, I just feel really strong." And then when we welcomed him to listen to group observations, he said, "Yeah." So the words that came forward were, "You look confident, your gaze is direct, you look grounded, you look happy." And then there's this third part of the exercise, which I love, where the instructor who created it, Lojo Simons, says, "Okay, so now I want you to imagine, what if you were to write on the back of your mask what this mask is hiding? What words would that be? What phrases, what feelings, what images, what..." And so we give them a few minutes to do that. And then we offer them the opportunity, if they desire, to share that with the group. And so this one individual who had shown this mask that was about confidence and groundedness and directness and, all of those wonderful things that we like to engage with. He had the same gaze in his eyes that he did in the mask. Like it was almost like he had the mask, even though it was his real face. And his gaze was absolutely direct, just like the mask was. And his eyes started to well up with tears. And he said, "My pain." And you could feel the group. There was about 15 of us, and you could feel everybody just take a breath. And we recognized him. We thanked him for sharing that with us, for the vulnerability, for the power of that part of himself. And I think the thing that was so incredibly striking to me was just like this moment of where the mask that he wanted to put forward in the world had this direct gaze. So did the thing that he wanted to hide, and that he had the ability through this exercise to be as connected to other individuals with that eye contact, with that direct gaze, and be in a place of like ultimate self-awareness, happiness, joy, and be in the place where those darker feelings exist, and be able to have that duality and be able to have that in a safe space, to be supported by this community and recognized. And it was such a powerful moment in this workshop. And it's something that has really stayed with me over the last 3 weeks.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Both of you, sharing your powerful moments. And isn't it interesting how having others witness or sharing or being in your space with multiple people, or even just one person, it doesn't matter. It very much is cathartic, and still allows everyone involved to express themselves and feel the feelings and be in that space. Thanks for sharing that. And Jake, have you noticed or experienced at all, being a student, any of your peers talking about, like, how do you, with your peers in your you're an adult, but in your age group, how do you all talk about mental health openly, or do you?
I think that I am in a very special program where it's kind of promoted to talk about mental health. And I think that most of my friends are doing some sort of human services. So when you talk about mental health, it's just so open and it's so vulnerable and just there. And, I've been so lucky with my experiences to find the words to express myself and to feel comfortable coming into a conversation just like this one and talking about, what the difficulties are, and create that intimate space with other people. Because like Dylan was saying, once you see someone in that light, that's when you really connect and understand. And, the connection, like I was talking about, is the healing force behind so many things. And especially when I think back to band, I think about the times where in high school, kids are awkward. They don't know how to express themselves very well. And so you have, at least for music, this like complete non-verbal expression of what you're feeling that day. And, I'd grown up with these kids, and when you're playing with them, you can tell just by the way that they sound if they're having a really bad day, if they're having a good day, if they're anxious. To be in a performance, and you kind of tap into each other. And I think that there's like a sense of mindfulness that comes with that, and it comes with creating any space with anyone. But to be able to be in a group of people and to play a sad piece of music, and the emotion just kind of wells up in you, and you notice that there's kids crying that are trying to play their instruments at the same time, it creates that connection. And afterwards you all join up with each other and you talk about, this made me so sad for this reason. It gives them a space to be like, well, I was sad because I was thinking of this. I was sad because I was thinking of, something that was said to me the other day, or like, in my case, it made me think about my cousin. And so through those conversations, I think it's hard to, immediately jump into a conversation sometimes and be like, how is your mental health doing today?
Right.
There's like more kind of like even into the conversation and opening of the conversation by first exposing yourself in some way. I think that's how the conversation starts.
Yes. Thanks.
That's what I found with my drama students
Yeah.
is how freeing it is. Like there's, in the way Jake was describing the playing of the music and the feeling of the emotion, there's something that I know I took away as a drama student in high school. And I've seen so many of my drama students in high school be able to allow theater to be that place where they express emotions that they may or may not feel like they have the space or permission to in other circumstances. And that's why I feel the arts are so valuable, is that it is this place where it's accepted, it's allowed, it's welcomed, and so it gives us that permission that we may not have in other places.
Yes, absolutely. And because of the experiences that your students have, you touched upon it a little bit, but I wanted you to actually give us a little bit more detail about how you support your students after the program and their experience.
And you mean the workshops,
The
or
workshops,
just any?
yes.
Any?
Well,
Yeah.
actually, any. You could, yeah. But I was specifically talking about the workshops. But yeah.
Right. So one of the things we do is we continue to nurture our relationships with that community organization. So one of the things we want to do is we're not viewing these as, oh, okay, we're going to come into this organization, we're going to do this workshop, and then we're out of here. We want to have an ongoing relationship with as many organizations as we can and give people, as many people, an opportunity, because one of the things is that particularly young people, it's like, oh, well, I can't sing like American Idol, so I'm not a singer, or I can't paint as well as so and so, or there's this perception that if you do arts or athletics, even I see that in athletics too. It's like, oh, I'm not an athlete because I can't do X, Y, and Z. And so I think one of the things that I like to present to my students, both in these workshops is that this is an open door for creativity, and there's not an expectation that, if you want to go pursue it, I will be your biggest fan. I will help you audition. I will coach you. I will do everything I can. And if you just want to do this to enrich your life, to broaden your perspective, but both with my students and with the workshops, we go back, we want to continue the work with that organization. We see students who want to repeat. We had a really great workshop in the spring, and the one of the participants said, "Oh my God, this is the last day. I don't want this to end. I don't want this to end. When are you coming back? I want to sign up." And so we said, "We will be back in the fall. We are thrilled. We would love to have you participate again." And it was interesting because it was one of the workshops we did on Zoom, and the first, it was a series of 6. The first 4, she would not even come on camera. Very verbal, very participatory, so much, a lot to say, really accessed her emotions, but she did not want to show her face. The last session, she was on camera the entire session with us and engaging, making eye contact. And she even realized in that moment, because we were asking some sort of reflective questions, as we do in the last several sessions, to learn, like, what's working? What did you get out of this? And she said, I've been able to share stuff I haven't been able to share anywhere else. I feel so much calmer. I feel much more relaxed. And she was even processing those benefits that arts and all sorts of mindful activities have on us. The centeredness, the groundedness, the mindfulness, the expression of self. And she really realized it. And the other thing that was wonderful was that she shared some of her poetry that she had created during the session and some drawings. And we were able to reflect back to her the things we saw in it that went even deeper than what she thought she was saying. And she was like, wow, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's right. I am saying that. I didn't even realize I was saying that. So it's such a source of joy. And to be able to see her go from being so shy in the first session to being fully engaged, fully participatory, feeling comfort and safety in doing that, that's what we strive to create with every workshop, whether it's online or in person.
That is so wonderful. It really speaks a lot to your program and how comfortable, that she was to come out of herself, I guess. Yeah. What qualities do you think are important in the teachers and those that you work with in working with the youth?
Adaptability and improvisation. That, like with all of the teaching artists, one of the things that we've tried to do is be very intentional and get a broad range of people. So I have a theater artist who is a playwright, and I have a theater artist who is an actor, and I have a theater artist who's a director, and one of the things that does, and some of them have specialties in music, and some have specialties in art, and so one of the things we're doing is we're employing multiple modalities of art into this, so that it's not about telling the right story, making the right piece of thing, but really allowing your story, bringing your story forward and then seeing what container you want to put it in. Like, is it a stop motion drawing of you, creating this picture with a monologue underneath it? Is it one of our students from a university setting last fall? It was a visual arts major, and she wanted to join the workshop because she wanted to get better at public speaking. And through the workshop, it was amazing because she worked with one of our artists who's a poet and revisited something she hadn't visited since high school, and created this beautiful spoken word piece that she then paired with video art that she created from the location she was sheltering in place. And she was sheltering in place on this farm. So all of the shots were of these outdoor locations and of plants and of, them sort of evolving. And it was sort of that condensed time motion thing where it's like, you see it opening, but it's much faster than happens in real life. And she created this extraordinary spoken word piece about the things she'd experienced, but also how she had found support and comfort in the evolution of community. And she used horticulture as a metaphor for the ebb and flow of life and experience and engaging with community, and how important community is in the growth process. So one of the things that I value in the teaching artists is a range of experience, adaptability, but most of all, what I'm looking for when I meet teaching artists is, do you have the capacity to both be support and guider, facilitator, but also the ability to create the space that allows the story to be told, and really do that in a way that asks you to step back from any ego involvement and allow that other person to have center stage.
Thank you. When I was listening to your story, one of my thoughts was, I wanted to say, she sounds so talented, but that's talent that's not really accurate, is it? So speak to that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would say, like, I think one of the things I've most treasured that somebody reflected back to me this year, and speaks to this point, is that I want to work with people who see the potential in others and then help them realize it. And somebody, one of the teaching artists was talking to me, and they were saying, yeah, that's the thing. Like, you see stuff in people before anybody else does. Like, where they're going to be like 3 months from now. And then you're starting to plant seeds and take them there. And, talent is wonderful. Talent's great. But everybody has something to say, and that's the essence of where art begins. Talent is something that helps us get to something aesthetically pleasing faster. But when you think about it, the core of the emotion, the core of the story, even if you think just about times you've sat with friends when they needed somebody to listen to them, all of a sudden, they may become very eloquent about their experience or a realization. And that's that moment that actually Jake sent me a letter after my dad died, and he was describing. I was talking with him about this. He was talking a lot about Matt's death and about everything he shared. Much of the stuff he shared with us about band and the healing process, and one of the things was that was this idea of language, and he was describing how for him, writing and music are these languages that allow this expression. For me, it's the arts. I started out in dance, then I moved to words. But it's this idea of being able to share that emotion, to share that experience, to find the language for it. And gosh, I hope I answered your question. I feel like I just got lost in so many big thoughts.
No, you did. And I think that's just it, isn't it, really? Because if someone finds their own language, then that brings out their talent. Everyone has, their talent in them.
Everybody has a story that is meant to be shared, that is crucial to be shared for the betterment of humanity. And that's why I created this program. That is what I want it to do. I want it to be global. I'm so excited to share it with Southern California, but I'm talking to artists in New York who work with teenage students in Japan who have even less ability and more stigma. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking with her about, okay, how can we share this program with them? How can we help those people? And create this space where it is safe to share your story, where your story is honored, where your story is heard.
So wonderful. And COVID taught us that the platforms are there, and you figured out a way to be able to still connect and do just that through the Zoom. So it is possible. Yeah. Amazing. So Jake, back to you about. Well, I was hoping you would share. You obviously have expressed that you go to music, but is there some other thing that you do for your own mental wellness that maybe you could share that others might decide that resonates with them as well?
Yeah. Like I'd been talking about, music did kind of fall to the wayside as my path took me more towards psychology and social work. And one of the main conversations that we do have in school is self-preservation. How are you taking care of yourself? If you're working with people who have such a range of emotional experiences, of mental health, substance use, it's so easy to become engulfed in their stories and to get that sort of compassion fatigue. And so we talk about that so much, how you protect yourself. And for me, it really comes down to finding some sort of way to express those emotions and finding some sort of way to kind of disconnect and get tapped into my body and myself. Because I think, we're in such a culture of like, go, go, go. We have to help people. We have to have the answers, that sometimes we just get so wrapped up in it, we forget ourselves in that. One of the most important things, and some things that I've touched on already, is just community and communication. When Dylan was talking about it, I kept thinking about something we talk about in school, which is a strengths-based approach to community involvement. And a lot of my groups that I had done at my past job were based on that, and based on people, writing down what their strengths actually are. And if they weren't able to identify them, have someone else help them by saying, well, you're really good at this. This is something that you've shown us that you're good at, so why don't we play into that? And when you have different people come together and you have those conversations, that's where so much healing happens. And so, I think that with my own kind of self-preservation throughout all of this, it's hard to do sometimes, but looking at your own strengths and looking at what you're doing right and looking at what you're doing well, and making sure to take account into that and be mindful with those things. And the most important thing with, this kind of work, if you're having a conversation with anyone who's going through a difficult time, is giving yourself grace too, and giving yourself that room to make mistakes and giving yourself that room to learn. Because if you're working with people, it is a constant learning process. You're not going to come into it and learn everything and know everything. There's going to be different people that you meet. So it's finding that community, it's finding that connection, it's bringing yourself back to your body, and allowing yourself to process ugly emotions in however you need to. That is obviously in a healthy way. So that's kind of how, I've been going about it the last couple of years.
Great suggestions. And I mean, especially important, obviously, for you and those who are studying and working with people. And, but I think it translates to everyone though, really too. Give yourself grace and remind yourself of your strengths. And, actually every point that you made, everyone could benefit from that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. And Dylan, I'll let you actually leave our listeners with whatever final thought you would like to share with us.
I think the final thought I'd like to share is just take a moment and really, really connect with somebody. Like, make time and space. That's one of the things that I think I've walked away from this year with is, like Jake was saying, I was do, like get this done, get that done, do that thing. And one of the things that has been a great source of healing for me this year is taking time just to sit with my dog and pet my dog and just, it's cliched, be in the moment, right? But it's really true, like being in the moment with your animal, being in the moment with your nephew, being in the moment with, those people in your life, because that sense of community and those people who recognize who you are, what your potential is, what your story is, and really, really hear you and feel you. That's where the heart of the healing is.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you both so much for being here, for being open, for sharing your stories, for talking about how art can help us heal and connect with each other and help us remove the stigma and be the voice. Ever important and always one of my missions. I, as always, will drop, of course, all of the information on Laguna Playhouse and Dylan and Jake's information in our show notes so that you can reach out and connect with them as well on your own if you would like, if you have any questions about anything that they've spoken about. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Shell.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Dylan.
If you are in crisis or know someone who is, please call or text the Suicide Lifeline. You can find out how to reach the Lifeline by looking for the numbers in the show notes of every single episode. If it wasn't glaringly evident in today's episode, I'm not a mental health or suicide prevention professional, and this is not an official AFSP podcast. I am determined, however, to find a way to help stop suicide in my community and to support those affected by suicide.
Thanks for listening to Hope Out of the Darkness. To learn more about Shell, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and how to submit listener questions to be answered on the show, visit hopeoutofthedarkness.com.